Note that this video is a repeat of the vault video from lesson 16. So here's the Wimbledon prize money slide from the lesson. And as you can see from the animation pane here on the right, it's a very complex animation. So just a reminder of how it works. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is because it's a very complex animation, I'm just going to drag this out. You can see here that all of the objects on this slide have been given sensible names. If I go to the Home tab on the menu and across to Select and Selection pane, you'll see that there are 22 objects on this slide, and all but the last two on this list have been given sensible names. So you've got small ball 1, small ball 2, you've got the sound of the hitting ball, and you've got various bits of text. And that makes animating them a lot easier. So if I go back to the animation pane, you can see what object we're dealing with at any point in the animation timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify this slide for you and break it down into its component parts. The first thing I'm going to do is to get rid of all the very simple animations, which includes all of the text and the background of the tennis court. And so we end up with this, which is just basically the tennis balls and the player hitting the ball. And in fact, if we go back to the selection pane again on the Home tab, you'll see that there are now just 11 objects on this slide. And to simplify it even further, going on to slide 3 here in the timeline, I've now deleted all of the balls on the slide, and we're just left with 3 objects. As you can see here from the selection pane, we've got the sound of the ball being hit and the 2 images of the player. And if I play this in slideshow mode, you can see how it works. The illusion of the player hitting the ball is in fact just generated by these 2 images, one with the player with the backswing and one of the player following through and hitting the ball. So let's go back to the animation pane again. And you can see now this looks a lot simpler. And in fact, it's actually 4 groups of animations as he hits the 4 balls on the slide. Each one is made up of 5 separate animations, apart from the first one, which is made up of 4. Let me explain what I mean by this. So the first animation is the player backswing. That's just the image of the player ready to hit the ball. And you can see that that appears, as you can see in the animation up here, that just appears, which means basically it just comes onto the slide without any kind of fancy animation or anything like that. Then the player backswing disappears, and at the same time, the player hitting the ball appears, and then the sound of the ball also being hit. And finally, the player hitting the ball disappears, and the player backswing reappears again. So every time the player backswing disappears, the player hitting the ball appears, and vice versa. You can see if we actually play it in preview mode in the animation pane how this works. So that's the simple animation of the player. Let's go on to talk about the tennis balls. So the balls move on motion paths, as you can see from these 4 dotted lines here. And again, you've got a group of animations here in the animation pane on the right hand side. The first thing to say is that the big balls here are not involved in the animation. They just simply appear, and I'll explain why. If I delete those 4 balls, you'll see what we're left with is this one small ball and 4 motion paths. So the small ball appears, which is what this animation here is, then it moves along the animation path, and then I use the grow and shrink animation to enlarge the ball to the size that I need to represent the prize money for that particular year. So if I double click on this grow shrink animation here, you'll see that it is enlarged by 420%. The next ball is enlarged by 580%. The next ball is enlarged by 700%. And the final ball is enlarged by 950%. The problem with this, and I'll show this in preview mode, is that when these balls are enlarged in the animation, they look very fuzzy, because what it's actually doing, PowerPoint, is it's enlarging the very small ball. And so what we have to do then is bring these large balls in to appear immediately after the grow shrink animation. And these are high resolution images of the tennis ball. So if I now play this in slideshow mode, or put it into the preview mode, it looks like there's a nice sharp tennis ball. And you can see that if I move this one out of the way, for example, and then play it again, you've got the fuzzy ball underneath and the big ball on top, which is sharp and in focus. So if we put this back together again, as you can see here on slide 7, it looks, as we've said, very complicated. If we play it on the preview mode, you can see that the player hits the ball with the sound, as we saw from the earlier slide, and the balls fly off in the motion path to create this kind of graph effect. And going back to the very first slide again, we can add the text back in on the slide. The title is there when the slide appears, and the other text has just been given a fade animation and comes in, as you can see on the animation pane here, after the large balls have appeared. And so again, playing the whole thing through, it looks like this.